time to rip off the mask.
Holy shit.
And get to the task. It's time to jump into the rotation. It's Sunday morning, and it's time to come to reality and come to church. We're here at the rotation with your political director, Gary Stein, my co-host, Carlos Angel Armida, and from the Beltway, our director, Christopher Cano.
This is my church, guys. The church of the rotation. I like it. We got to go tax exempt.
And directly below us here, we have a special guest from the national NORML, the folks who know more than everybody else does nationally, except for the folks on the inside who are making the mistakes. We have Justin Strekal, who is the political director of Florida of National NORML. Justin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, it's early Sunday morning, but I'm feeling really good, excited to talk with you guys.
Now, your head must be pounding because I know that you have your finger on the pulse of all the different cannabis laws that are pounding out here and there. And we have a lot of people who have a lot of questions about what the heck is happening inside the Beltway that's going to eventually affect the both of us. We spent 4 years with that stupid meme of Trump sitting in some theater with a joint. Everybody said he's going to legalize it any day now. Any day now. Did you ever feel that way over in D.C.?
You know, I did not. I never, took a off the cuff remark that Donald Trump made while running for president as if it was etched in stone, as some other people had. I would have loved for him to sign a bill like as Cory Gardner kept on, now former Senator Gardner kept on telling us that Donald Trump was going to sign the States Act into law. Would have loved that. But was not surprised to see that he was not the champion that so many of our friends on the right have espoused him to be. But just as we can't be under any delusions that somehow, some way, Joe Biden, the current president, is now a huge believer in our cause. We still have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of interesting ideas coming from President Biden. First off, of course, he had a nice little interview with Bertha Madras where he totally agreed with her on so many aspects. And that is scary in and of itself. But we were expecting that once he got into office that things were going to change. The atmosphere was going to change. And of course, we heard this last thing 2 weeks ago about the number of White House employees that were asked to resign or work from home. And the question is, was it strictly a security clearance thing or is it a administrative policy thing?
That's a very good question, and it is entirely too early for me to be ready to throw bombs at this moment, because the mere fact that we're having this conversation about this current administration and the fact that they're willing to even consider engaging in the conversation is leaps and bounds ahead of the previous administration under Donald Trump, the previous administration under Barack Obama, the previous administration under George W. Bush, the previous administration under Bill Clinton, three of whom publicly admitted to smoking cannabis. So, I think when we talk about drug tests, when we talk about all of these different components when it pertains to federal employees, we have to remember that there's still very much in effect Executive Order 1256-4, the Federal Workplace Drug-Free Workplace Act, which was since 1986 under Ronald Reagan. This is something that in order to change these policies, we need to rescind that executive order. That hasn't happened yet. I will flag that the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, or basically HR for the White House and the administration, did put out revised guidelines just a few weeks ago that says that previous use of cannabis is not automatically a reason to not employ somebody. Whereas 4 months ago, under the previous administration, if somebody had filled out their form and said that they had previously smoked weed, they would not even be considered for employment. So it is a step forward, but it is far short of where we need to go.
So this is still basically an outstanding policy from the Reagan administration that has not totally been absolved yet. But what was the word that was saying that this particular administration was going to overlook that, at least for a little while, and they changed the policy, or was that strictly rumor?
We're still, I think, only 60 days into the new administration, something like that. there's still a long way to go. I don't like to trade on rumors. As the lobbyist for NORML, I take my job very, very seriously in making sure that every time I say something, it is absolute fact. And I don't want to comment on rumors and nor because, oh my goodness, people love to traffic in them.
Well, we have something similar here in Florida that you guys are dealing with over in D.C. And we have a bill that HB 1455 that's putting a 10% cap on flower, THC, and 60% cap on concentrates, and eliminating advertising for cannabis docs. And of course, you guys have a situation going on with Cornyn and Barbara Boxer, and so you can tell me what the heck is going on with Barbara Boxer. I mean, she's San Francisco,
It's actually Senator Feinstein.
Feinstein, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Dianne Feinstein, 89-year-old Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, that's true.
West Coast girl.
Yeah, Senator Feinstein has long been antagonistic about reform. Still to this day, won't publicly commit to defending California's adult use program. So what Senator Feinstein and Republican Senator John Cornyn, so they, in a bipartisan fashion, they recently released a report that called for, among other things, consideration of THC caps in states that have reformed their policies. So here come two prohibitionist senators in bad faith suggesting how more enlightened state lawmakers should consider regulating their state programs. To borrow a phrase from our current president, they're full of malarkey, and there's nothing that they should be doing they shouldn't be engaging in this conversation in such bad faith, but they're prohibitionists who support the ongoing criminalization of marijuana and the oppression of all of those people who consume it. So it's hard to take any of this seriously, but they are two senior U.S. senators, so we absolutely have to.
Now, of course, we've had, I'd say, almost 200 bills that have come out of Congress since 1972 to reverse the damage of the Controlled Substance Act. Question is, over the last 2 years, we've actually had some bills hit committee and move forward, like the SAFE Act and the MORE Act. Do you see what Senator Feinstein and Senator Cornyn is doing to move forward at all, to get to committee or to move anything, to change policy?
That's a really good question, and I really appreciate how you frame it, because I think that's one thing that we need to do a good job of as advocates and activists is making sure that we're acknowledging where people are and where we want them to get, and that they might not get all the way there ever. But any movement forward is good progress, especially for folks like Cornyn and Feinstein, who have been ardent, strict prohibitionists, and now, even by releasing this report, they're acknowledging that this is the direction things are going. When it comes to committees and how the U.S. Senate works, we kind of dodged. Maybe I should, with all the gun violence rates, I shouldn't use the term dodged a bullet.
Grocery stores.
We're very fortunate to see that Senator Feinstein is not the chair of the Judiciary Committee. She was the ranking member. And there was actually a contentious moment where it was unclear which Democrat was going to take the chairmanship when the partisan power flipped in the U.S. Senate. And now it's Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. He is not a flag-waving supporter of legalization. He is still relatively uncomfortable with explicitly saying, I support marijuana legalization. But he represents a state that has legalized. He's an original sponsor now on the Safe Banking Act. I want to shout out Chicago NORML, who 2 years ago, when they came to Washington, D.C. as part of our lobby day, they had a meeting with Senator Durbin's office, and then miraculously, the next week, Senator Durbin had co-sponsored the Safe Banking Act for the first time ever. So, it's these kind of leather organizing and efforts that are going to get us across the finish line, and we don't need everybody who votes yes to be an enthusiastic supporter of ours. We just need them to vote yes. And I think we are getting every single day, we are increasingly closer to having a majority of the Senate publicly vote yes. I think if we had a closed door vote today, we would get where names weren't attached, we'd get 50 plus, maybe even 60 plus U.S. senators voting to end federal prohibition by removing marijuana from the CSA. It's just, there's still a lot of public jockeying that needs to get done, so that way these politicians who are worried about certain constituencies can say that they satisfied the concerns of their constituents, particularly the police.
So, Justin, I have a question. Here in Florida, just in the last week, 2 public employees have been fired from their jobs for legal state-sanctioned medical marijuana use. And, in both cases, the firings cited that they received grants from the federal government. One was a school, both being school districts, and one was a county. And so, under the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988, that's what they were citing, is that, sorry, you got to go. This is still Schedule I drug federally. So even if we remove it from the Controlled Substances Act, does there have to be an update to the Drug-Free Workplace Act? Or, do we need to do both? Do we also need to update the Drug-Free Workplace Act? Because we're pushing a Public Employee Workplace Protection Act here in Florida. But if they're citing federal law, then our Public Employee Act would be, essentially nullified, in the court systems and the battles that would ensue.
Well, that's so. To answer the principal question, do we need to deal with the federal Drug-Free Workplace Act? The answer is very simply yes. That being said, though, right now Florida's medical marijuana program is in complete defiance of the federal government. Like, essentially, for all intents and purposes, every single lawmaker that you have that will defend the Florida's medical program, no matter how they want to change it, as long as they acknowledge its legitimacy, they're on this issue. They're essentially giving the finger to the feds, because they're saying, we don't recognize your authority on this issue, and we are going to move forward in complete defiance of your federal mandate, right? So they're kind of radicals, right? Even the ones who, they may support a THC cap, or they may support really high taxes, or they may support really onerous restrictions on what, because even though they're not doctors, they still think that they should be able to tell people who suffer what you can use it for and what you can't. Like, they're still in opposition to the federal prohibition. So, but regarding the public employees thing, I'd love for you to send me that stuff, because I hadn't heard about that. But I will point out, just last year, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms of Atlanta changed their employment policy, saying that they will no longer conduct pre-employment or random drug tests for marijuana for public employees. We've seen this in New York City. We're seeing this now. More and more states are engaging in this conversation. We have medical protections for employees in multiple states now, mostly that have been achieved through the courts, actually, and like state level courts that have said it is discriminatory if you fire someone for partaking in a substance that has been recommended by their physician. So this is an evolving conversation. It's really hard. And if I could soapbox for just one more second, it's really, really hard to nail this down, because there is a legitimate concern, even if it is just a nugget of one that's covered under bullshit that they argue with it. There is a legitimate concern about intoxication in the workplace, right? Just as most no employer wants their employees to show up drunk. How we address that legitimate underlying concern by cutting through all the bullshit that's used to argue in defense of oppressive policies that deny people the right to put a roof over their head and bread on their table is a very difficult thing to do when it is underlying that nugget of legitimacy. So it is an ongoing conversation. We got to be thoughtful about how we approach it, and we just got to use the facts. So this is why, every single day for the last 2 weeks, I've sent out our fact sheet on the impacts of the workplace in states that have reformed their policies, showing how workplace incidents have not gone up. The cost of costs associated with any problems have not gone up. We don't see increases in employee absences, or we don't see any real increases in employees being fired for being intoxicated. And slowly but surely, through that hard work of trying to uneducate people from their propaganda and get them to acknowledge reality, we're eventually going to win. It's just going to take a while.
See an increase in workplace morale.
Absolutely. I mean, Chris and I wrote the bill, and we originally set it up for private industry and public industry, and they thought the only way to get it to their first committee was to back it up so you wouldn't have a new just cause going through the the private industry. And yet we are still stuck here because the first committee chair is Senator Ray Rodriguez, who also sponsored the CAP bill the last 2 years prior to this. And he said he doesn't see a problem with employment and cannabis. He doesn't know about people who have actually gone from hospice to going back to work because of this particular medication. And so what we need from you guys out there is as many stories as you have of employment in situations where you have been affected by just the fact that you have a medical card that allows you to be healthy enough to go to work and supply for your family and be a tax-paying citizen. These are the kind of things that Ray Rodriguez needs to know, because we only have about a week and a half until it's too late for that first committee to actually hit for a bill to be able to survive the entire session. Because we have a 12-week session. We're going up to week 5 now. And if we don't get it in its first of 3 committees, it's not going to go anywhere because we're going to start working on the budget pretty soon. So if you have a story, send it to us. We are going to send those things en masse to Senator Rodriguez and say, we need this bill to at least be heard and debate in its first committee, and let's have that discussion at least. What is he so afraid of? But that brings to my next question is, you are doing so many things over in the federal government that we would love to see change things here in Florida, because we've had to deal with, anytime there's a ripple of a stone hitting in DC, eventually we get the wave. You have someone who says we need a robust regulatory system, and we get stuck with this idea we're going to have to regulate the hell out of you because the federal government says so. That's not exactly what was said, but that's just the way that it came down. So let's say that now that the Senate is somewhat different and we're possibly getting rid of the filibuster, that this time the MORE Act and the SAFE Act will go beyond the House and will actually get heard in the Senate. If those bills go through, who will preempt who? Will the federal government preempt the states, or will the states be able to opt out and preempt the government?
So that's a really good question, and I talk about this all the time because there has never been a bill introduced, to my knowledge, in the U.S. government or in the U.S. Congress that would force states to reform their policies. You know, every bill that we talk about that's quote unquote national legalization is a descheduling bill, is an ending prohibition bill. You will, with very rare occasions, sometimes I slip, I will never say federal legalization. Because what I'm worried about is if people hear me say that, then, you know, people in Florida, people in Texas, people, you know, in the 35 states that haven't reformed their policies for state level possession might believe that ending federal prohibition somehow ends state level prohibition. And under our federalist nature of our Constitution, that's not the case. And even the most radical proponents of marijuana policy reform, and I put radical in the sense of like they're the most marijuana freedom proponents in the federal government, they're still not going around saying we need to force states to choose to change their policies. So if federal prohibition ended tomorrow, the biggest differences you would see in Florida would be, you know, your state licensed businesses have access to the full suite of banking services. Assuming that those private banks choose to engage with you, they would be able to do so now legally. And the way that they deal with paying their taxes. That's about it, right? It would still take a while for whatever other rules or regulations were put forward for those to come into compliance. But the word regulation in and of itself doesn't necessarily have to be a scary word. It can be, for consumers, a very good word in the sense of the kind of policies we were just talking about with employment protections. Those are regulations, right? Like those kind of protections are the rules that we would write, the rules that we have worked with Charlie Crist, representative from Florida, in the Fairness of Federal Drug Testing Act that he introduced a couple of years ago with a Republican co-lead. You know, like those are regulations, right? So there are good regulations. I would just want to throw that out there, right? Like not all regulations are bad. In fact, many are very good. So how it is that like how long those downstream rules and regs are going to take effect? Probably conversations I've had with lawmakers anywhere between 180 days and 5 years. But they're not. It's not like ending federal prohibition is going to be this catalyzing moment that automatically changes rules in America. It just automatically is going to change the mentality of lawmakers, particularly in prohibition states, realizing they now need to catch up to the feds when the feds are already light years behind the American public.
I mean, one of the few good things I can think of, the fact that this is federally illegal, is that MedMen could not declare bankruptcy. But we're going to get into another issue. That Adam, we love you, but you created a terrible thing. But the fact is, we often wonder, what is the advantage of what the status quo is right now, and should we worry about going forward, and what are the possible cons of getting federal legalization that might remove protections we have in the state?
Yeah, no, and I think, and I pick on Florida all the time, just as the rest of it does.
What the hell, man?
But with
we need a spanking.
your licensing structure, right, and how few entities are able to compete, which hugely depresses the consumer options, which is antithetical to any kind of definition of capitalism one could come up with, right? And it's I think we need to do a much more thoughtful approach to licensing than the state of Florida has done. At national at national NORML, we try not to say like, hey, listen, you should have your licensing structures this way, that way, because every state, every community is different. And we don't think there's a one size fits all, but the Florida size is a terrible fit for anyone. And so probably after federal prohibition, I think that the likelihood for there to be numerous lawsuits against the existing operation could trigger a kind of unintended consequence of shutting everything down, right? And you don't and the question is would that quote unquote shutdown mean that consumers won't have access to the very limited marketplace y'all already have? I would say that is the biggest fear. It's not a real substantial fear that I have. I would just say like that's like the worst parade of horrors where it could go to. I think more likely than not, though, you will see it triggering a bunch of lawsuits, people trying to say like, hey, listen, like you need to issue more licenses. And ultimately, it's going to be good for consumers. It's just going to be a real bumpy road between now and then.
Yeah, we see the situation here in Florida all the time. They write a law and somebody ends up having to sue for it because it's actually unconstitutional. And we go on for years trying to fix it. That's what we've been doing here in Florida. I helped with the guys who did the Flora Grown case. And we've been working on it now since January of 2017 to break the vertical mandate over here and to allow smaller organizations to come and actually have some kind of social equity kind of situation.
Can I ask you guys? So, I remember when Ron DeSantis was in Congress, he talked about the existing medical companies as if he described them as cartels, like legal cartels. And now my understanding from the rhetoric I've seen coming out of his administration, very different rhetoric. Is there any kind of underlying movement towards dramatically expanding licensing, having those kind of social? Where's that update?
It's been pretty much squashed. Yeah. We haven't issued a new application process since 2015, and we're stuck with the 22 we have right now, of which 17 got them through a law administrative judge because of the fact that their application process was flawed. And so therefore they got them by lawsuit. And so therefore these are all fodder for mergers and acquisitions right now, because most of these guys failed in their application in the first place, which was only an application for low THC, by the way. Yeah. And once they got their license, they really realized that they were not capable of actually creating a vertical company with the infrastructure, with the money that they had. And so therefore, that's why all of a sudden Treadwell becomes MedMen, and then Cresco buys up this person, and Red, White, and Bloom just bought up acreage of all things over here. So it's just back and forth. It's like Pac-Man versus Pac-Man. We're just wild. We're eventually going to be, hopefully not one or two, but I have heard of a particular company that's buying another Florida company and then putting up their license for sale. But I can't give you any more information on that because I'd have to kill you afterwards. But
the other part of it, Gary, is the fact that the law itself that was set up by the legislature said that for every 100,000 patients, they need to dish out 5 more licenses. Now we're at 500,000. And when was the last time we seen new licenses come out, Gary?
Again, the last new license that was actually achieved through an application process was 2015. All the rest of them were given out via the legal system. And so we missed the 4 new ones that for the 200 mark, the 300 patient mark, the 400 patient mark, and now the 500 patient mark. And yet people still say any day now they're going to be releasing a new application. It's kind of like when Trump was in charge and he said, in 2 weeks, we'll have a new healthcare plan, right? Our 2 weeks have never, ever come across. And we're still waiting at this point in time. And that is why the market over here for a license is really becoming quite a crocodile farm. They really are going after each other tooth and nail. Now, here's a question you might be able to answer for me because I wasn't quite certain. Somebody asked me the other day. Washington, D.C., of course, has their own rules and regulations, even though they are essentially an extension of the U.S. legislature. So if they become a state, would that change their cannabis law over there? Which is crazy in and of itself because Chris has got a lot of stickers.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So in Washington, D.C., there just for your viewers who may not know, residents who live in Washington, D.C., Americans who carry American passports, who for all intents and purposes are full-blooded Americans, but are denied the kind of representation in the U.S. Congress with senators. You have no voting representation in the U.S. Senate if you're a D.C. resident. You have no voting representation in the U.S. House for the floor if you're a D.C. resident. And there are other problems associated with the holdover district status. I mean, think of it like, the just the denial of rights. It's a modern day colony, if you will. And there, because of that, that's why when we saw the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, the mayor of Washington, D.C. was not able to activate the National Guard because we're not a state. They had to wait, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours for someone at the White House to allow them to do it, to try to bring some kind of stability to the Capitol. So those are just a couple of the things that pertain to DC statehood and why I hope your viewers would support it. Under DC, because DC doesn't have its own autonomy, its budget has to get approved by Congress. And there is a complete asshole member of Congress named Andy Harris. He's a Republican out of Maryland who often likes to pretend that he's the mayor of Washington, D.C. and impact how Washington, D.C. is able to spend their own money, local tax revenue that's generated, because he's on the right committee to do so, the Appropriations Committee. So since 2014, when D.C. voted to legalize adult use marijuana, Andy Harris put forward a thing preventing the district from being able to spend 1 nickel of its own tax dollars to set up a regulatory structure and a licensing structure to do that. So it'd be as if, let's say, to compare it to Florida, Ron DeSantis, when he was in Congress, voted to prevent the federal government from interfering in Florida setting up its medical program, right? That is not the case. Here we're seeing direct intervention. So if we had DC statehood, the district could, as Florida does now, give a big middle finger to the feds and say, we're doing it anyways. But because they're a district, because they don't have autonomy in their budget, they can't do it. So if DC flips to be a state, the mayor and the city council right now are arguing about how they'd want to legalize and how much justice they're willing to give. It's a good argument that they're having, but they're ready to legalize the minute they have the autonomy to do so. And I suspect that there would be an adult use operation, like a functional marketplace up within 6 months. So if that happened, you'd be able to come to Washington, D.C., see the sites, see the museums, and buy legal weed.
That'd be good because that'll make up for the lack of car dealerships and mines and stuff that has been preventing DC from becoming a statehood for all these time.
I will say we do have car dealerships in Washington, D.C. I don't know where they got that argument. They pulled that talking point straight out of where the sun doesn't shine. And it is flatly not true. It was a weird talking point to see because I'm like, there are dealerships in the district. It's not, I don't know. I mean, over 700,000 residents. There are more DC residents than there are residents of the state of Wyoming or Vermont, both of whom have 2 senators, both of whom have a full a member of the House of Representatives with full voting rights. And both of whom can call the National Guard up and activate them in case of emergencies. And it's absurd that we deny those fundamental rights of representation and self-determination to nearly 1 million American citizens.
I worked for the Centers for Disease Control when I was stationed in D.C. from 91 to 93, just the post-Marion Barry area. And I saw the district people really suffering over the fact that they did not have control over their own tax dollars. That's why the fleet of cars, we would have people go out on a task to get HIV bloods from folks over in Southeast or whatever, and their car would break down somewhere, and they wouldn't be able to get them back because these cars are so beat up and they didn't have the money. In fact, I think at one point in time they actually ran out of toilet paper for the city, for the district, because like they didn't have access to their own tax dollars.
Yeah,
and hopefully that would make a huge difference. And when statehood comes and they have the right to go ahead and create their own cannabis tax structure to be able to actually survive as an actual city like everybody else does.
Yep.
Well, Gary, that's a good question around taxes. I know that many of the groups out there outside of NORML that are advocacy groups, some of the veteran groups that I work with, have concerns over the MORE Act, over federal legalization, adding another tax layer to already the taxes that we see in the states, and essentially creating an illegal market that's out of touch for the vast majority of working class people. If only the middle class and the wealthy are able to afford legal cannabis, and we're still going to criminalize the black market, the legacy markets, then there is definitely still a lot of issues there. Justin, what do you say to those veterans groups and to those other groups that have major concerns over the existing legislation? Because we all can see like, hey, anything is better than nothing. For some people, this forward progress feels like a couple steps back.
No, absolutely. And I remember having multiple conversations with some of the folks you're referring to about this issue. And it's been incredibly frustrating to talk about these things when the MORE Act would net reduce taxes on the existing programs, right? Dramatically so. And this is because of how 280E works. As of right now, for those of you who are watching who might not be aware, every single state licensed program, be it medical or adult use in those marketplaces, those companies are not able to take any standard deductions whatsoever. So it's as if, when you go to file your taxes personally, you don't get to write off anything, or you don't even get to take the standard deduction, right? So they have to pay taxes. What that means is they end up paying a overall effective tax rate twice that of every other sector of the legal economy. It's absurd. So while I am sympathetic to concerns about a federal tax and those who believe that there shouldn't be a federal tax at all, I'm sympathetic to that point of view, but I'm not going to let the perfect ideology that some people hold be the enemy of the overwhelmingly positive from where we are today. And it does bring the collective tax rate down. And I know that there are still people who are going around saying, oh, this is going to raise taxes, this is going to raise taxes. But if the net tax rate dramatically falls, are you mad about that? Like, let's say I get, you make $100,000, right? And you have to pay $50,000 in taxes this year, right? next year you only need to pay $30,000 in taxes, but 5% of that goes to a different fund. Like, you're net saving $20,000, like, instead of 25,000, like, and the money that it's funding is funding expungements. It's funding SBA programs to promote local and diverse ownership. It's directly offering grant money to local and state localities and states in exchange for them setting up licensing structures that prioritize local and diverse ownership. Like, it's going to be funding for VA research. Like, it's hard to say that a overall lower tax bill and funding justice programs is a bad thing. But it's tough. I know that some people are very, very anti-federal taxes, period. I don't take that kind of a rigid line. I don't think it's appropriate, and I think taking that kind of a rigid line is overall hurtful to the cause, because I do not see a pathway forward where the federal government doesn't impose some kind of a tax. And I think that fighting when, the original proposal was 25%, we got them down to 5% and slowly escalate to 8%. Like, I count that as a huge win. And I'm not going to let other people, other naysayers who don't believe in federal taxation, take away from that.
Well, it's amazing how politics tends to get in the way. Here in Florida, of course, the libertarian wing of the Republicans are the most pro-cannabis. And yet they're also the same guys who say all taxes are theft.
Yes. But the question is do they support a minor tax on cannabis in order to fund the regulatory system that we have to make sure that we have safe products and consumer protections and yada yada and other things? Like, I don't know. I've talked to a lot of libertarians that acknowledge that contradiction. They support a minor reasonable tax on cannabis while they oppose, income taxes writ large.
I mean, we have two situations, of course. How much taxes we actually collect? Because if you look at, like, for instance, Illinois' law, huge excise tax. You think that's not passed on to the consumer? Of course it is. And yet we also have sales tax after that. So having taxes upon taxes. But the other issue we have, especially here in Florida, is where does the money go once it's collected? Like, for instance, we had a huge win when we won against the tobacco companies back in 1996. And yet a lot of that money in the trust fund does not go towards tobacco cessation efforts. In fact, every year when they have to balance the budget, they dip into that trust fund, be it whatever they want to do it for, including, stopping all abortions, whatever they feel they want to put the money towards at that point in time, they do it. Yeah. We just had another $100,000 being given to drug-free Florida to go ahead and find out the severe effects of cannabis on pregnant women and postpartum, of course, totally ignoring the Jamaican study in the 1960s as being non-existent. And yet we can't get money to get organizations like NORML and those kind of situations with that kind of cash that it's out there and available to us.
Yeah. I will that's absolutely true. And how we have governments prioritizing our resources is crazy. I do want to say one other thing to Chris's question, if you don't mind, on just like federal taxes in general. Because the MORE Act is not perfect, right? It is the best thing. It is the only bill to end marijuana prohibition that's ever been taken up in a chamber of Congress, and it passed, and we're damn proud and happy about that. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. There is a lot of improvements to be made. One in the tax regime, which you brought up, Chris, is creating a program that's going to not apply those taxes to medical programs, because we do believe there should not be taxes on people's medicine. So we think that's an improvement we can make. I've had conversations with a lot of lawmakers about that. I think we're making forward progress. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to see that in future legislation changed. I would encourage anybody and everyone who's concerned about that, talk to your lawmakers about it. We made an action alert to contact your U.S. senators about they're working on this right now. And everybody can edit those messages and include whatever it is they want. I would encourage folks to do that. But the other thing, the good part that got slipped into the tax structure that nobody talked about, well, except for me, so now I'm going to talk about it with y'all, is is the fact that we got language that had never been public before included in it was the only good thing that changed in the bill at the end, that exempted made explicit exemption of home cultivation from taxation, right? So if under previous legislation that had been introduced, it made no distinction there. It just said if marijuana is grown in this country, it needs to be taxed. And we got language included that exempted personal use cultivation marijuana from federal taxation, which affirmatively acknowledges the legal right for people to be able to do that within states. So hopefully that will be something that states will look at, see, oh, look, the feds included this. That means they're probably going to include it again in the future. And maybe that means we shouldn't continue to criminalize people for growing, 1 plant, 5 plants, whatever number. I don't really care what the number is. I want to change the fact that the police shouldn't be able to enter someone's home just out of a concern that they're growing for themselves. So that number can be 5, it can be 10, it can be 99. We just need a number, and we need the affirmative legal right for home cultivation.
What would be the logistics of being able to tax home grow?
What was that?
What would be the logistics behind being able to tax home grow? How would you know what amount you're actually, because with excise tax, obviously any amount going out of a particular cultivation center can be taxed. But with home grow, are you going to have the cops coming in with a scale and say, let's check and see how many plants you have and how much you've harvested this year?
Tax collectors coming into my garden.
Oh, yeah. Let them sit down.
I've heard all kinds of absurd proposals in different states, how they want people to have to get permits to home grow. They want there to be annual inspections. They want this, they want that. Like it is crazy what kind of cockamamie ideas state policymakers will think of when it comes to having controls over the public in regards to marijuana. We fight against all those in general. But yeah, from my perspective, as long as there is a legal right to home cultivation, then that forces the police, if they want to enter your house based on the suspicion of cultivation, that they need to get a judge to sign a warrant, because the suspicion is not home cultivation. The suspicion is diversion, illicit distribution. And it's our hope that judges will give scrutiny to the police and say, I'm only going to sign this if you give me a compelling reason to sign it, AKA go do police work, right? Don't just go harass people because you have a hunch.
Imagine that.
I mean, right after Prohibition, obviously, we got a lot of the gangs knocked down, not because of the violence, because of tax evasion, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing that's going to happen to us?
Not as long as we don't have some kind of a law that can be inferred that home grow should be taxed. No.
You brought up a good point of through all of this, in that, United States senators, the ball's in their court at this point.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for us here in Florida, because Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, I have emailed them every single time you send out an action alert, Justin. I sign it and I send it, and I get those responses from them that they do not support us on cannabis. Yeah. And Marco Rubio is up for election in 2022. So for all of you watching out there, I encourage you, especially if you're a Republican, to understand that where his loyalties lie are not with the vast majority of Floridians in having access to their medicine.
Yeah, Ted Deutsch, we're waiting for you to run. We want you to run on this one. But that's just my own opinion. Or Pam Keith. We have a couple of people we want to get in there, because our DSC folks, they don't always pick the best candidates.
I'm not going to disagree with you there. Having followed Florida politics since 2012, when I briefly worked on Lois Frankel's campaign for Congress, sometimes y'all aren't that good at picking statewide candidates.
I'm not talking Alan Grayson, although yes, I am. But the fact is, we have a habit of picking people who are dynamic but not necessarily able to win.
Yeah.
Though I hate this idea of winnability as an actual reason to vote for somebody. I'd rather vote for somebody who's competent as opposed to just somebody who can win. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the previous president in for 4 years. That seems to be the issue. So the MORE Act. Now that it's hopefully going to go past the House again, since it's a new legislature, and onto the Senate. When do you see it being debated on the floor?
That is a very good question. So right now, as one can, guess, is that sometimes the House and the Senate don't talk to each other as much as you would like them to in a governing coalition sense. The biggest question is just trying to make sure that we get it sequenced in a way that one chamber isn't undermining the other chamber's efforts. Because we've seen in the Senate very, very loudly, very, very predominantly, where Senator Booker, Senator Wyden, and Senate Majority Leader Schumer have said, we're working on our own bill. Right? And they're rattling the sabers about that. And in the House, there's the MORE Act, where the first ever bill to end marijuana prohibition that's passed, right? But it was an imperfect bill. At the end, there was a lot of whataboutism with the bill. We've never alluded that the MORE Act is the perfect bill in the world. It's just the best that we've ever reasonably thought could get consideration, right? And we were right, and it did, and it passed. So now the question is what are the imperfect aspects of the MORE Act we're going to see improved in this Senate effort? What are other concerns that may come up in this Senate effort that we didn't have about the MORE Act, and how those two ideological lanes are going to intersect, right? So in the MORE Act, there's been a lot of talk about reintroduction and moving it in the House, but there's a lot of pent-up priorities, right? And we've seen how much legislative time the American Recovery Package took. We know that the president and congressional leaders are already working on a second reconciliation package. There is a jockeying of efforts to include cannabis-related reforms in a reconciliation bill, so that way it will require 51 votes in the U.S. Senate as opposed to 60, because any standalone marijuana bill in the U.S. Senate would require 60 votes. So, and it is very hard to see a pathway to 10 Republicans that doesn't include, Chris, as you just brought up, Marco Rubio, right? Like so the question is how would we be able to get to 60 versus how do we want to navigate this in a reconciliation package, and what can we get in and get past the Senate parliamentarian as far as what is acceptable in a reconciliation package. So that is me filibustering and telling you all of the reasons why I cannot very succinctly answer your question and give you a timeline, because those are the factors that we're considering right now, or that are being considered right now when it comes to when is the MORE Act going to move through the House again, if at all, this year, when is the Senate package going to come out, and when can we expect movement on either of those things?
I mean, I was worried that we actually lost our bipartisan edge when we lost Rohrabacher, then we lost Gardner. It's like, who else is on our side on the GOP are we going to lose, and who's going to replace them? Has there been anybody to replace those particular spots?
Yes, we did have just last week the Senate introduction of the Safe Banking Act came out with Senator Steve Daines, Republican of Montana, as the Republican leader. And we did pick up additional Republican co-sponsors on that bill who had not previously been on it in the last Congress. I think that this idea that somehow Cory Gardner was a unicorn is just now a thing of the past. He showed that Republicans can be in favor of reform and not have a backlash from his own party. His electoral defeat had nothing to do with cannabis, his position on cannabis. And it's very difficult to think that more Republican lawmakers are going to look at the continued trajectory of polling on marijuana policy reform and say, like, oh no, I can't do that. When now a majority of Republican voters, either by plurality or outright majority, support reform, support outright legalization, it's increasingly untenable for Republican politicians to maintain a pro-criminalization stance.
I mean, the latest polls, I think, we showed about 58% of the country is in favor of responsible adult use. I'm not going to use the word recreational. I'm trying to get it killed somewhere, but one of these days we might just get rid of that word. But it is remarkable that the polling that shows what the people are interested in does not match the number of people in the government who represent them, even though this is a representative government. Now, Rohrabacher, he was kind of like, the good with the bad. He'll buy you a car and shoot your dog. But that is what we had to deal with a lot of times, is that you have to take the good with the bad kind of thing. And that is why people don't want to be single issue voters, because they might be interested in voting for somebody because of the fact that they have a positive cannabis bill. But then again, they're going to also increase their taxes or shoot their dog or whatever. So I'm hoping that we get some kind of equity and some kind of plurality where we can move forward without worrying about all the pros and cons. Doctors always have to weigh the risks and benefits. So what are the risks and benefits of the MORE Act as it currently stands?
I would say I would point out 2 of the 6 Republican electeds, only 5 of them were still Republicans when they voted for the MORE Act, because Justin Amash had resigned from the Republican Party and had been a libertarian. But 2 of the 6 elected Republicans who voted yes on the MORE Act are from the state of Florida. Brian Mast and the guy from the Panhandle whose name I'm spacing on right now.
Matt Gates.
Sorry, I may have been cute. I just don't like to talk about Matt Gates.
You see his name 3 times in the mirror, your hair turns up like Big Boy.
I know. I feel incredibly uncomfortable discussing Matt Gates after he brought a Holocaust denier to the State of the Union years ago. So 2 of the 6 elected Republicans who voted yes on the MORE Act hail from the state of Florida. Why? Because Florida, of course, right? Like you guys are such an inherent contradiction amongst yourselves that's how that shook out. So
those guys like to party. I mean, one's from South Florida and the other one, grew up with a rich daddy in politics. How does he not smoke copious amounts of weed?
So how it is we're going to get more Republicans on board? We had dozens of Republicans co-sponsor the States Act. I think of the States Act as kind of, the gateway legislation to fully ending federal prohibition. It's like, ending federal prohibition light. It just leaves marijuana as a Schedule I substance, which is going to create all kinds of complications when it comes to enforceability amongst taxes and banking issues, which I don't think that they fully have appreciated the concerns that we've raised there. But I think slowly but surely you're going to see more. I think that when we just saw last week, David Joyce, a Republican of Ohio, send a letter to Joe Biden basically saying, hey, I saw that your administration fired people. Don't do that. Right. Like a Republican came out and sent a letter and made it public that he was worried about employment discrimination when it comes to cannabis. Right. Like that. If you would have told, if I would have told you all that 10 years ago, that a senior member of the Republican caucus was going to send a letter like that, you would have told me I was crazy, right? Or maybe you would have said, okay, maybe in 10 years, and then in which case you would have been right on the money. But like slowly but surely these gears are turning. I saw someone in the chat post something I think was really thoughtful, which was paradigm shift comes in 20-year cycles, and we're 5 years into this cycle. Now, in no way, shape, or form am I willing to concede that this is going to take another 15 years to get done. I think this is going to take much less time than 15 years to get done. But it acknowledging it is a paradigm shift. People are willing to engage in these conversations. They're willing to have more of an open mind than they did previously. But we're not done yet.
I mean, as far as Gates is concerned, if it weren't for Matt, we wouldn't even have a cannabis program here in Florida. It was his work along with Katie Edwards from Okeechobee who actually got that compassionate care work, because we got him to sit down and watch Weeds with Dr. Maida, and he actually turned in that direction. He used to call me up at like 9 o'clock at night. He'd say, I was just talking to Dr. Jason Pirazzolo. I don't get what he's saying. Could you explain what it is to me? So, I would have these very uncomfortable meetings every once in a while. I can show you a picture with myself and Matt Gates and Roger Stone in one room. And I'm sitting there sweating bullets like, it's nice to talk to you guys. But we've had to deal with some folks who they only had shared one piece of our ideology. And that apparently is the kind of thing that Matt Gates is. The question is, can he flip any of the more House members towards cannabis, or is he that toxic right now because he did apply for that Sycophant of the Year award?
I will say I think that his ability to be a good faith partner here has dramatically reduced since January 6th. One of the most common questions I get when I'm talking with the Democratic office about bipartisan efforts and Republican engagement is, how did they vote on the 6th? And given Mr. Gates' decisions both on that day and since then, he has further and further entrenched himself into a position that I think is for even quote unquote mainstream Republicans to accept, right? Let alone any members of the Democratic Party. So I think he is not the best messenger right here, but maybe Brian Mast, right? We do see, from Florida, we do see more Republicans stepping up, willing to engage in these conversations, which we really appreciate. Like, I just mentioned Dave Joyce, House member, just mentioned Steve Daines, member of the Senate from representing Montana. There are plenty of other potential Republican champions. I just know, when there was debate on the floor of the House about the MORE Act, Matt Gaetz spoke against the reparative justice aspects of the bill and the expungement policies, and the majority of Americans support expunging marijuana offenses, right? So he is not even necessarily as thoughtfully advanced on this issue as he proclaims to be. And it hurts when we have any of our champions supporting continued criminal records for minor offenses, right? There's other Republicans that we need to engage, and hopefully, Charlie Crist has partnered with Don Young, Republican member of Alaska, on the Fairness in Federal Drug Testing Policies Act that addresses federal employment discrimination pertaining to cannabis. There's a lot more Republicans out there who are kind of curious and even further ahead than we give them credit for, and I think we need to do a better job of not just giving the loudest ones the acknowledgement, but giving the thoughtful ones the acknowledgement.
Now, I'd love to have the MORE Act in some form or other pass within the next 2 years prior to the midterms. But my next question is basically, what about the SAFE Act? Are we going to see any form or piece of it be moved within the next 2 years before midterms?
I'm certainly hoping so. I would so much rather, I was just doing some email blasts on the Safe Banking Act a couple weeks ago, and I wrote, while we would prefer for banks to be able to enter into agreements with marijuana related companies as a result of ending federal prohibition, in the meantime, while political consensus is still being forged on how to do that, it is imperative that this bipartisan aspect of public policy go into effect. The fact that we have the American Banking Association and NORML lockstep, hand in hand, coordinating on this, I think is truly a testament to how much broad support there is for safe banking. The real question is how is it that we're going to be able to get it done? Is it something that we can possibly attach to a reconciliation package? Is it something that we can attach to maybe another must-pass bill that has to get 60 votes, but we can add it on there because it has broad bipartisan support? Hell, the bill got 321 votes in the previous Congress. 47% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives already voted yes on this bill, right? And more are willing to now that we've seen new Republicans get elected in the last Congress, their last election, who I believe would vote yes if given the opportunity. So I think that would put a majority at their caucus voting yes. It just got reintroduced in the House. I suspect we'll see a suspension vote in the coming months. So we'll see if I'm correct and we see more than 50% of Republicans vote yes. And I think we will. So just, again, with so many problems facing America right now, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, right? And we're digging out of that. We're still dealing with, catastrophic issues that we've been ignoring for decades. Marijuana's on the list. We're on the top 10 of the list. We're working on the top 5 of the list. And hopefully by the end of this congressional session, we'll have gotten floor time in both chambers of Congress.
Well, we appreciate you being here. I know that NORML has been fighting for this since the mid '70s, and they've gone through all sorts of iterations. One thing they haven't gotten is any kind of congressional stipend to do the job that you're doing. I think the last time that I talked to you, I think was over at the museum when they had that summit a couple of years ago. And you mentioned the fact that the budget for NORML, as much as you guys do, is not that great. So Zoom has actually been a great thing, so we can finally get you on board here to get a chance to talk to the folks of Florida NORML. Now, that said, I would take it that the national NORML, just like our chapter, needs some kind of funding to move forward that does not come from the federal government, because it ain't going to come from the federal government. So what can we do to support NORML in the national sense?
Hey, no, I appreciate that question. So a couple things. First and foremost, if you're not on our email list, get on our email list. We do a weekly Thursday newsletter, and we do action alerts. I'm about to send out another one now, where we're actually going to be asking people in Florida who have a history of taking actions to contact their friends in New York and New Mexico and tell them to tell their state lawmakers to support reform, because both of those states are coming up this week. But no, like, give us money. Money's great. Our average contribution is $18, and I think like 28 cents. We are funded by the grassroots. We represent the grassroots. We are the consumer advocacy organization. I would say 4 out of 5 times our interests align with the emerging industry, but we are that check on the industry to represent consumers' interests. So if you want to have a consumer's voice at the federal level, kick us a couple bucks. If you want to have consumers' interests at the state level, kick Florida NORML and Suncoast NORML a couple bucks. If you want to have both, kick us both a couple bucks. And do what you can, spread the word, make sure you're talking to people on a regular basis, making sure that they know that we exist as a resource, and making sure that ultimately for my intents and purposes as the lobbyist here, I want everyone contacting their lawmakers all of the time. I really appreciate, what Chris brought up, where, when we send out action alerts that he fills them out. We have generated hundreds of thousands of constituent touches to federal lawmakers during my tenure here. And I think that is what gives the permission structure to federal lawmakers to evolve their positions. Because as you said, Gary, like, public polling isn't necessarily it. 91% of Americans agree that there's too much money in our political system, yet our lawmakers, when they look at survey the political landscape, and they say, okay, well, 9 in 10 voters think this is bad, but 2% of people fund 90% of my re-election. Who are they listening to, right? The status quo got them to where they are now, so why would they rock the boat? The same kind of theory applies to marijuana policy, and it's our job. It's incumbent on us to change those underlying dynamics and to demonstrate that we're paying attention, that we're watching what they're doing, that we've made it explicitly clear that what we want, and then they have 2 choices. They can either give us what they want, or what we want, or they won't. And they're going to have to suffer the consequences if they don't. And I think that is why we've been helping move this ball forward so much faster now recently. And I'm just very fortunate that we are now all in a moment where we get to benefit from the decades and decades of work of activists and advocates who have come before, when marijuana was not a cool thing to talk about, when marijuana was not socially acceptable to talk about, when it was taboo, when even just having a meeting could invite law enforcement to come break it up and put you in jail, right? So we benefit from all those who came before. I know all of you have been doing this for longer than I have, and I'm just your humble scumbag lobbyist trying his best to get lawmakers moving forward.
We've been smoking weed since before it was cool. We're weed hipsters.
Yeah. By the way, Hash Bash is coming up, guys. So
Sweet.
Yeah, head over to Ann Arbor and support those good guys over there. And
Carlos, you've been quiet on a lot of this. I know how politics can put you to sleep, brother. But I always go to you for the Joe Stoner.
It's good.
I always go to you for the Joe Stoner point of view. Because you're a business owner, but you're also, like you said, you've been smoking weed since before it was cool. So, out of all the politics that you're hearing, what gives you hope, And then at the same time, what kind of gives you pause, brother? We want to hear from you.
Well, really what I'm hearing is this isn't really a partisan issue. We've been going back and forth between Democrats and Republicans and how Democrats and Republicans feel about this. But Justin brought up something earlier that it's, the politicians are just trying to satisfy their constituents. And it really seems to me that, like, where we move forward here is voting, not necessarily voting for marijuana reform, but voting for the right politician to bring on that marijuana reform. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like marijuana reform is here. The laws are coming, right? We need the right politicians to enact those laws. And I think really moving forward, the scariest thing is that a lot of people don't vote for these single issues. The scariest thing is that, we're voting Republican or Democrat, not for the issues at hand. I don't know.
There's a lot of things I like to vote for. I'd like to vote to get all special interests to only have one vote, because right now it seems like if Geo gives somebody $10, it's worth a lot more than us giving him $100, because Geo seems to have more impact as far as funding the federal prisons and funding our campaign folks over there than we do. The other thing I'd like to see, of course, is DC statehood and merge the damn Dakotas. And I'm telling you, Christy Nome, you are on my list, girl, because we are going to merge those damn Dakotas, who, by the way, split up to make certain that the Republicans had 2 more votes as opposed to 1, which is why they split them up back, about a century ago. Well, it's about time that we merge those Dakotas and then make statehoods. We still have 50 states. And then I think I'll be happy, but I don't think I can vote for that right now. Can I?
You don't get the option to. I will say, just on a random thought, a lot of folks are talking about getting rid of the filibuster. And I'm just like, well, we could just get rid of the Senate. Like, the Senate was a compromise at the time to protect slavery, like the institution of slavery. Like, we could just get rid of the Senate too. Like, it's within the realm of possibility. I know that, it doesn't. It's not a good look that Florida has just as much power in the Senate as one of the Dakotas, or maybe your future Dakota superstructure. It's pretty absurd that millions and millions and millions and millions of people have the same representation as 800,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the case of DC, none at all.
Or in the case of DC, none at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need to take a real close look and change our approach on how we choose our lawmakers. I think that's our biggest issue. I think we vote for how these lawmakers are marketed and not necessarily what they represent. And because of that, they know that they don't have to satisfy us as constituents. They have to satisfy the police as constituents, And I don't know. We need to get rid of the Senate is where it comes down to. We need to get rid of all of our lawmakers and just start fresh.
Well, we've come to past our hour, but we want to thank Justin Strekal coming here from the Beltway all the way through the benefit of electronics to be here today when he can't really afford an airline ticket to come to Florida and join spring break like all the other kids are doing. But we appreciate you coming here.
No, if I can just say one last thing, just on what Carlos was saying, there was a Justice Mikva who was largely accredited for ending the death penalty in Illinois, and his slogan was "Democracy is a verb," and I think that speaks exactly what you were talking about, Carlos. I think more people need to get involved, period, for whatever it is that brings them to. And when we have a robust engagement with our citizens, then that's how we're going to have our democracy. So you guys are doing it on marijuana policy. I love it. As your scumbag representative in Washington, D.C., I'm doing my best that I can. But no, everyone needs to get engaged. And I really hope everybody who watches this is on your guys' email list, is active in sharing your resources, because collectively, that's how we generate that ripple to get things done.
Well, guys, if you are not already a member of NORML, remember that when you go ahead and give us your $25 to become a member of Suncoast NORML, you not only get this fantastic pin that everybody at NORML carries, part of the way we GPS each other, but also the fact that it makes for great conversations over in supermarkets when you're in line there. And of course, you need to become a card carrying member. That green car might not get you a discount at Culver's, but it will get you our respect. And it will also remember that we need everybody on the ground, boots with grassroots efforts, because that is how this movement started. That is how this movement's going to end, and we need your help. And of course, so if you go to suncoastnormal.org membership, click on that. You can get not only the pin, but also this fantastic mask, which you may still need to use unless we can finally get everybody vaccinated.
And we didn't even talk about our event coming up.
Go ahead, talk about our event.
Well,
as long as you have the graphic up there.
I don't really need to talk much about it because I've got all the information right there up on the screen. We are holding the Best Blunt in the Bay contest. It's going to be here at Chillum out in Ybor City on April 16th from 7 to 12 a.m. Details are on our website. You can sign up to be a contestant. You can sign up to be a judge. You can just come to the event and check out all the blunt rollers and smoke a bunch of blunts. And yeah.
I'm sorry.
Free admission for card carrying.
There you go.
Eat this, guys. Okay. See that? Smooth, clean. Almost looks like it's wrapped on a pencil.
Yeah.
That's the way things need to go.
Whatever, man. That's a king palm,
stuff.
And that's a palm leaf cone that you packed. You didn't roll that. You packed it.
Well, I'm OG, and I don't have to do it to prove anything to anybody.
OGs know how to roll blunts, Gary.
Look,
I
once had a perfectly rolled blunt handed to me at the Hash Bash in 1980. It was filled with paraquat, but it was well rolled. That was the important thing at the time.
Listen, Gary, it's kind of weird that you're a judge because I'm not sure that you'd be able to tell what's a good blunt.
No, I'll be a good judge because I'm not going to come there so totally unsober that I can't tell whether it's a good blunt or not. I will know.
You're good.
like the one you rolled last week.
Don't even bring that up.
No bueno.
Don't even bring that up. It's been a while. It's been a while since I rolled the blunt.
Well, I got to tell all our listeners, get your tickets if you plan on being a judge or a competitor in the next 2 weeks. We're closing registration on April 9th for the competitors and judge positions. We'll only have general admission the week of the event available. So get your tickets now before they sell out.
So if you want to prove you're the best blunt roller in the Bay, you've got limited time.
And we actually got the entire show without talking about the damn cap here in Florida, pretty much, which was
talked about it for like 5 minutes.
We touched it, but we went national with it, which was good because Justin, I don't know if you saw this article yesterday in the New York Post before we leave here, but it actually states that the increase in cannabis use is directly related to the number of mass shootings.
Gary, you'll touch the cap.
Because it's creating psychosis, which is leading to people buying AR-15s and shooting up supermarkets. Because what else but cannabis could possibly do that?
Oh.
And the good news is that Representative Spencer Roach, who has the cap bill, was the one who tweeted that article out yesterday saying, look what I found. It is so much a fact. It's nice to know that he's using the New York Post, and obviously next comes after that, the National Enquirer, to go ahead and use as testimony when he goes ahead and files his bill. Yeah. Because that's Florida, and that's how we roll.
When it comes to lawmakers in Florida, it is fitting that his last name is Roach because he's like that dirty roach that's covered in ashes at the bottom of the ashtray that nobody really wants to smoke or touch because it's been there for 3 weeks. You know,
ashtrays.
Down with Roach.
Down with roaches. You know,
down with Roach for sure. All right, guys, we're getting into a whole new episode now, and we're way over.
Justin, thank you for your time, brother.
I
appreciate you for all the hard work that you're doing. I know it is a thankless job in many cases. None of us get paid to do this. We're glad that we have you on payroll there at National to do this, and that's why all proceeds go towards legalization efforts. We need to make sure that Justin is there in the halls of government running it for us. So we appreciate y'all.
Hopefully for not too much longer, though. Hopefully for not too much longer. Hey, thank you guys so very much for all you're doing. I appreciate it. And seriously, go forth, kick ass in Florida. Stop the caps, obviously, and everything else y'all need to do. I wish you the best of luck, and yeah, keep us posted. We'll talk soon.
I'd much rather stop the caps than stop the steal.